He sat on the cold sidewalk, his back resting against the faded brick wall of the small cafe on the corner. The city moved around him in a blur of hurried steps, blaring horns, and the chatter of people who seemed too busy to notice anyone else. His clothes were worn and patched, the kind of clothes that had seen long winters and hotter summers than most could remember. A small cardboard sign leaned against his knees. In letters scratched by hand, it read, "Can I fix it for a meal?" He had been here before, in this same spot, day after day, hoping for someone who would see more than just the tattered clothes and the rough beard. Most people passed without a glance. Some tossed a coin or a granola bar. A few laughed outright. The laughter always stung, though he rarely showed it. He had learned to keep his face calm, his voice soft, and his pride tucked away. It wasn't easy. Pride was something he had carried all his life, something that had once been his armor. Now it felt heavy, like a chain he carried silently. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of fresh bread from the cafe and the faint scent of gasoline from the street. He watched a group of men in suits hurry by, their phones glued to their hands, their faces locked in the seriousness of their own lives. He knew he was invisible to them, and in a way he had grown used to it. But he still hoped. Hope was stubborn like that. A young woman came out of the cafe, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a bag of pastries in the other. She slowed when she saw the sign, her eyes scanning his face with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. "Can you really fix cars?" she asked softly, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. He nodded, his hands shifting on his knees, brushing dirt from the patches of his jacket. "I can. I've done it for years," he said. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your skills deeply, even when no one around you does. She smiled, but it was a small, cautious smile, unsure if she should believe him. "Why are you here? Why not work somewhere? You sound like you know what you're doing." He let out a slow breath, looking away at the passing cars. "Life doesn't always go the way you plan," he said. "I had a good job once, a really good one, but things changed. People change. Sometimes you end up on the street, even when you didn't want to." He didn't go into details, not yet. Some things were too heavy to carry out loud. She hesitated, then handed him a piece of her pastry. "Here, at least eat something." He accepted it with a nod, his fingers brushing hers for a brief moment. The gesture was small, but it reminded him that kindness still existed in the world. He ate slowly, savoring the warm sweetness, feeling a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Connection. The morning continued its rhythm. Cars stopped at the light, horns honked impatiently, and the city's pulse went on without pause. He watched an old pickup truck roll to the curb near the cafe. The engine sputtered, coughing like an old man struggling to rise. A man jumped out, slammed the door, and swore under his breath. He bent over the hood, trying to figure out what was wrong, but his frustration was obvious. He stood up, brushing the dust from his knees, and walked toward the truck. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I can fix that. For a meal." The man looked at him and laughed, loud and sharp. "A meal?" he sneered. "What are you, some street magician? You look like you can't even fix a sandwich, let alone my engine." He smiled faintly without anger. "I understand why you'd think that, but I really can fix it. I've done it for a long time." The man shook his head, clearly amused. Sure. Go ahead, Houdini. Prove it." He nodded, crouched by the engine, and opened the hood. His hands moved carefully, inspecting the wires, the spark plugs, the battery. His fingers were steady, his movements precise, even as the man behind him continued muttering jokes. A small crowd began to gather, curious now, their interest piqued by the strange combination of a scruffy man and a sputtering truck. Minutes passed. Sweat formed on his brow, though the air was cool, and his hands worked with a skill born of decades of practice. The engine coughed again, then roared to life. Smooth, steady, strong. The crowd murmured, some faces turning from amusement to shock. The man who owned the truck stared at him, open-mouthed. You fixed it?" Just like that. He straightened, wiping his hands on the sleeves of his jacket. Just needed a little attention, he said simply. Sometimes that's all it takes. A few people clapped quietly, unsure if they should. Others exchanged whispers, trying to place him, trying to figure out why someone who looked like this could do something so precise, so professional. The young woman from the cafe stepped closer, her eyes wide. "I can't believe it," she said softly. "You really did it." He gave a small nod, almost embarrassed by the attention. "I didn't do it to impress anyone," he said. I just wanted to eat." The man who owned the truck handed him a few bills, but he waved them away. "Keep it," he said. "Just take a meal. Anything you want from the cafe." He nodded gratefully, feeling the warmth of human kindness again. It was a rare thing these days, and he didn't take it for granted. As the crowd began to disperse, he felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, yes, but a quiet, humble pride. He still remembered the days when his name had been known, when his work had been celebrated in magazines and at auto shows. But that was a different life, a life that now seemed almost like a dream. He wandered back to the cafe, holding a sandwich and a cup of coffee someone had brought him. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, listening to the sounds of the city. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or the day after. Life on the streets was unpredictable, full of challenges and surprises. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope. Hope, he realized, wasn't just about being fed or having a place to sleep. It was about being seen, even for a moment, for who you truly were. And today, someone had seen him. That small moment of recognition, of connection, was enough to keep him moving forward, at least for now. He looked around the street, noting the cars, the people, the shops. Everything seemed the same, yet different. The laughter that once stung now felt distant, almost irrelevant. He had shown a skill that could not be denied. A skill that was part of him, part of the life he had lived. And no one could take that away, no matter how rough the streets became. He finished his meal, tucked the cardboard sign under his arm, and stood. The city was moving around him, still bustling, still loud, still indifferent in many ways. But he had faced the day, had done what he could, and had been recognized even in a small way. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As he walked down the street, he spotted another broken-down car. His hands itched to work, to fix, to create. But he remembered the sandwich in his stomach, the warmth of the coffee in his hands, and the small smile of the young woman who had offered it. He would wait, he would watch, he would choose the right moment. Because even on the streets, even when the world seemed to have forgotten him, he still had something no one could take away. His skill, his patience, and his quiet strength. And he knew, deep down, that one day, someone would see him for what he truly was. Until then, he would keep moving, keep helping, and keep surviving, one meal, one repair, one small act of kindness at a time. And so he continued, a man who had once been a legend in his field, now hidden in plain sight. But legends, he knew, never truly disappear. They simply wait for the right moment to remind the world of their worth. The next morning, the city was alive with its usual chaos. Cars honked impatiently at each other, bicycles weaved through traffic, and people hurried along the sidewalks with steaming cups of coffee in hand. He walked slowly down the street, keeping an eye out for anything that might need fixing. His sign was tucked under his arm, still carrying the words that had gotten him noticed yesterday. It wasn't long before he spotted a small crowd gathered near a delivery van parked awkwardly on the side of the road. The driver, a man in a crumpled uniform, was scratching his head and muttering to himself. Smoke curled faintly from the hood, and the engine made a series of sad, coughing noises that said it was not going anywhere without help. He stepped closer, letting his presence be known without forcing it. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I can fix that if you'd like." The driver turned, and his face fell into a mixture of disbelief and amusement. "You?" he said, laughing, though it was tinged with desperation. You're just a guy on the street. You think you can fix a delivery van that's stalling in the middle of traffic?" He nodded. "I can. I don't need much, just a chance." The driver looked around nervously, clearly worried about his schedule and the growing line of honking cars behind him. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said a little reluctantly. "But if this doesn't work, I'll call a proper mechanic." He smiled faintly and knelt beside the van, opening the hood carefully. The smell of oil and gas was strong, but he didn't flinch. Years of experience had taught him how to handle even the most stubborn engines. His hands moved quickly, yet precisely, checking connections, spark plugs, and the battery. He tightened, twisted, and adjusted with care, knowing exactly what needed attention. People gathered around. Some whispered to each other, some recorded videos on their phones, and others watched silently, unsure if they were about to witness something extraordinary or a disaster. The driver hovered nearby, biting his lip, clearly unsure whether to hope or worry. Minutes passed. The van coughed once, twice, and then roared to life with a steady, confident hum. The engine sounded smooth and strong, as if it had never been broken. The crowd gasped, a mix of surprise and awe spreading through them. The driver stared, his eyes wide. I don't understand. How did you do that?" He straightened, brushing his hands lightly on the sleeves of his worn jacket. "Sometimes a machine just needs the right touch," he said simply. "You've got to listen to it, pay attention to what it needs." The driver's hands shook slightly as he handed him a small envelope. "Take this," he said. "It's not much, but thank you." He shook his head, refusing the money. "Keep it. Just make sure the van keeps running. That's all I need." A few people in the crowd whispered among themselves, clearly trying to figure out who this man was. One young man, clearly impressed, stepped forward. "Wait a second," he said. "You can fix all of this? Just like that? Who even are you?" He smiled faintly, a mixture of amusement and humility. "I'm just someone who knows how to work with machines," he said. He didn't want to talk about his past yet. Pride was one thing, but he had learned long ago that showing too much could bring more trouble than respect. As the crowd dispersed, a woman from a nearby shop stepped outside, her curiosity getting the better of her. She had been watching quietly, and now she approached him with a cautious smile. "I saw what you did," she said softly. "That was incredible." "Really?" He nodded, accepting the compliment with quiet grace. "Thank you. I just do what I can." She studied him for a moment, sensing that there was more beneath the surface than the worn clothes and rough beard suggested. "It's strange," she said, her voice low. "You act like this is normal, like you do this every day. But I feel like you've done more than just fix a few broken vans in your life." He looked away, toward the bustling street, and let out a soft sigh. "You could say that," he said. "I've spent a long time learning. Machines, engines, designs. It's been my life. But life doesn't always go the way you plan." The woman nodded, understanding more than he realized. She handed him a cup of coffee and a sandwich from her shop. "At least eat something," she said. "You deserve it." He accepted the food gratefully, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the coffee itself. People had been kind to him before, but there was something different about this gesture. It wasn't pity, it was respect, recognition, a small acknowledgement of who he truly was. As he ate, he remembered his past. The days in brightly lit factories, designing cars that people admired. The awards, the recognition, the excitement of seeing a vehicle he had created drive down the highway for the first time. Those days seemed like a lifetime ago, almost unreal. Yet, the skills he had honed over decades remained, sharp and ready, waiting for the chance to be used again. After finishing his meal, he returned to the street. He knew that every opportunity mattered, even the small ones. A broken engine here, a van there, it was more than just fixing machines. It was a way to remind himself, and perhaps the world, that he still had value, that he still mattered. Later that afternoon, he noticed a small red car parked awkwardly at the curb. Its tires were flat, and the hood was slightly dented, likely from a careless driver. He approached cautiously, wondering if anyone would give him a chance this time. A young man was leaning against the car, nervously checking his phone. "Hey," he called out. Can you, help me? My car won't start, and I can't get a tow until later. He looked at the man and then at the car. I can fix it, he said, keeping his voice calm. I'll need a few minutes, and maybe something to eat while I work. The young man hesitated, glancing at the street, then shrugged. All right, I don't have much, but there's a sandwich in the bag. If you can get this car running, you can have it. He smiled faintly, not because of the food, but because someone had trusted him, given him a chance. That trust mattered more than the sandwich itself. He knelt by the car, examining the engine and tires carefully. He adjusted the connections, checked the battery, and tightened what needed tightening. Slowly but surely, the car began to respond, its engine turning over, purring, as if grateful for the attention. The young man's eyes widened. No way! You really can do this, he said, disbelief and admiration mixing in his voice. He nodded, closing the hood with care. Every machine has its own story. You just have to pay attention and listen to it. Word began to spread. People who had seen him work before told others. Passers-by stopped, staring as he moved from vehicle to vehicle, fixing what others thought was impossible. The street began to feel different somehow, charged with a quiet respect for the man who could repair what others had given up on. By evening, a small crowd had gathered again, whispering to each other about the man on the street who could fix anything. Some recorded videos, others simply watched, trying to understand how someone who looked so ordinary, even downtrodden, could possess such skill. A local newspaper photographer, drawn by the murmurs, approached him cautiously. Excuse me, she said. Can I take your picture? People are curious about what you just did. He looked at her, considering for a moment. Privacy had always been important to him, but he realized that telling his story might help others see value in people who were overlooked. All right, he said quietly, but just a picture. That's enough for now. The camera clicked, capturing the moment when a homeless man had transformed a struggling street into a place of wonder and curiosity. It was more than just a picture of a person. It was a picture of skill, humility, and the quiet dignity that comes from doing something well, no matter who is watching. As night fell, he found a quiet corner behind the cafe, pulling his jacket tighter against the chill. He ate the last of his sandwich slowly, savoring each bite. The day had been long, but it had also been full of small victories. People had started to notice him, not as a beggar, not as a joke, but as someone who had something real to offer. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the city wash over him. Cars honked, footsteps echoed, distant laughter carried on the wind. And somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope burned brighter than it had in years. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to impress, and new chances to show what he could do. But for now, he allowed himself a small sense of pride. He had survived another day, shown his skill, and reminded himself that even on the streets, he had value. That even when the world laughed, he could still prove himself, quietly, patiently, and with skill that no one could take away. And so he slept that night, not in comfort, but in peace. Peace that came from knowing that the right opportunity, when it came, could change everything. That the world might be cruel, the streets harsh, but a single act, a single repair, could remind people that heroes often walk among them, unnoticed, waiting for a chance to be seen. The next morning, the city seemed different. There was a quiet buzz in the air, a sense that something unusual had happened the day before. People on the street whispered to each other, pointing subtly toward the corner where he usually sat. The videos that had been shared online were still circulating, some already going viral. The man who had been invisible to the world was suddenly being noticed, though not everyone knew why. He arrived at his usual spot, his sign tucked under his arm. He kept his expression calm, as always, but inside, he felt a mix of nervousness and cautious excitement. The attention of the previous day had been unexpected, even overwhelming, and he wasn't sure how much he wanted it. But he knew that skill, like truth, could not stay hidden forever. Almost immediately, a small crowd had gathered. People were whispering, pointing, and nudging each other. Some were smiling, some were curious, and a few were skeptical. One man in a crisp suit, clearly from the business district, approached slowly, his eyes narrowing as he studied him. "You're the guy from the video, aren't you?" the man asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "The one who fixed the van?" He nodded quietly. "I am. I did what I could." The man shook his head, still not fully believing. "I've seen a lot in my life, but I've never seen someone like you. You didn't just fix the van, you brought it back to life. How do you do it?" He smiled faintly, brushing a hand against the dirt on his jacket. "You pay attention. You listen. Every machine has a story. You just have to hear it." The man nodded slowly, clearly impressed but also puzzled. "There's more to you than just fixing engines. I can feel it. I've worked around some of the best in the industry, and you remind me of someone. Have you worked in automotive design before?" He hesitated, knowing that this moment would lead to questions he wasn't sure he wanted to answer yet. But there was no denying the truth. "I have," he said softly. "Many years ago, I was involved in designing some vehicles you might have heard of." The man's eyes widened. "What? You're serious? You're a legend in the field. I've read about the engineers who changed the industry, and you're one of them." He nodded, not wanting to boast. Pride was not what he sought here. Recognition had never been the goal. Skill, knowledge, and the ability to help were enough for him. Yet the weight of disbelief in the man's eyes, the whispers of the crowd, and the videos online made the truth unavoidable. A few more people approached, recognizing him from the videos. Questions came fast, some incredulous, some admiring. "Is it true you helped design the X200? asked a young man with a camera. "I thought that was impossible." "Yes," he said simply, his hands folded in his lap. "I was part of the team. I worked on many projects over the years. But that was a long time ago." The crowd murmured, some stepping back as if to reassess the man they had been laughing at, the one they had dismissed as a homeless stranger. There was a shift in the air, a quiet change from ridicule to respect, as the truth of his story began to emerge. A local journalist had arrived, drawn by the buzz. "Sir," she said, notebook in hand, "can you tell me your story? People want to know how someone who was so accomplished ended up here, on the street, asking to fix cars for a meal." He looked out over the street, taking a deep breath. The memories were vivid, some painful, some bittersweet. "I've had many lives," he said quietly. "I worked hard. I built things I'm proud of. But life has a way of changing the path you're on. Success doesn't always last forever. And sometimes the world moves on without you." The journalist nodded, sensing the depth of his words. She looked back at the crowd, then at her notebook. "And now? What do you want now?" He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I don't want fame. I don't want recognition. I just want to do what I can, help when I can, and maybe remind people that what you've learned, what you've built, it never leaves you. Even if the world forgets your skill, your knowledge, that stays with you." The crowd was silent. It was as if the city itself had paused to listen. People who had mocked him yesterday now looked at him with awe, realizing that they had been wrong. That the man who sat on the sidewalk, who had been ignored and laughed at, was someone extraordinary. A former colleague from years ago happened to be passing by. She stopped, frozen for a moment, staring at him as if she couldn't believe her eyes. "It can't be," she whispered. "Is that him?" He looked up and recognized her immediately. The recognition was mutual. She stepped forward slowly, her expression a mix of surprise, guilt, and admiration. I thought you were lost to us," she said softly. "I never imagined I'd see you here." He nodded, his voice gentle. "Life takes us to unexpected places. But I'm still here, still able to do what I love." The woman looked at the crowd, then back at him. "People need to know. They need to see what you've done, who you are. They're laughing at the wrong person." He shook his head. "No, it's not about that. I don't need people to know. I just need to keep moving forward, one day at a time." Still, the journalist began taking notes, recording the story, asking questions. The crowd continued to watch, fascinated. They had come expecting to see a homeless man, maybe someone funny or pitiable, and now they were witnessing the truth of a man who had shaped an industry, a man whose talent had never faded even if the world had turned away. Later, a young boy approached, holding a broken toy car. He looked at the man shyly. Can you fix it?" he asked. He smiled gently. "Of course. Let's take a look." The boy handed him the toy, and he examined it carefully. His hands, skilled with engines and cars, moved delicately over the small machine. Within moments, the toy was moving smoothly again, its little wheels spinning with precision. The boy's eyes lit up. "Wow, you did it!" he exclaimed. He handed it back, smiling softly. "Sometimes the smallest machines teach you the most," he said. The crowd watched, some whispering about how incredible it was that someone who had been homeless could have such skill and patience. Others began to ask questions, genuinely curious about his past, about what he had built, what he had designed, and the life he had led. The journalist approached again. "Do you regret anything?" she asked, her pen poised. He shook his head. "Regret? No. Life is full of lessons. Every success, every failure, every street I've slept on. It's all part of the story. I'm still here, and I still have something to give. That's what matters." People began taking photos, filming, and sharing the story. What had been a simple act of kindness and skill had become something larger, something that resonated with everyone watching. The man who had been invisible, who had been ignored and laughed at, was now becoming a symbol of resilience, of hidden talent, of the quiet power that comes from experience and patience. A few people came forward, offering food, blankets, and other small gestures of help. He accepted politely, not because he needed charity, but because it was a reminder that people could see value in someone who had been overlooked. By evening, the street corner had transformed. No longer was it just a place where a homeless man sat. It had become a place of fascination, of stories shared, of whispers of admiration. The man himself remained calm, quiet, and humble, even as the crowd's energy shifted around him. He was not performing for them. He was simply being himself, allowing the truth of his skill and his story to speak for itself. When the sun began to set, he walked to a quiet corner behind the cafe. He ate a simple meal someone had brought him, reflecting on the day. Recognition had come, yes, but it was not what he had sought. What mattered was that people had begun to see him, truly see him, not as a joke, not as someone to pity, but as a person with talent, history, and dignity. He knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people, and new opportunities. Some might be kind, some skeptical, but he was ready, because skill, patience, and quiet strength were things no one could take away. And now the city, or at least a part of it, was beginning to understand. As night fell, he felt a sense of calm, a rare peace that came from knowing that the truth of who he was could no longer be ignored. He was more than his circumstances, more than the streets, more than the sign he carried. He was a man who had shaped the world in ways most people couldn't imagine. And slowly, very slowly, the world was beginning to see him for what he really was. The next morning, the corner where he usually sat was buzzing with energy. People from all over the neighborhood had started gathering, curious to see the man who had fixed cars and captured attention online. Smartphones were raised, cameras clicking, and whispers floated through the air. Some were there for curiosity, some for amusement, but most were there to witness the truth for themselves. He arrived quietly, his sign tucked under his arm, his jacket worn but clean enough to show that he cared. Despite the growing crowd, he moved as he always did, calm, measured, unassuming. Pride had never been loud, and he didn't need it now. All he wanted was to help where he could, to show skill rather than demand recognition. A journalist from a local newspaper was already there, camera crew in tow. "We'd like to interview you," she said as he approached, her voice polite but eager. "People want to know your story." He nodded. "I can talk a little. I prefer to let my work speak for itself." The journalist smiled. "That's fair. But people will want to hear your voice too. As he knelt beside a broken-down motorcycle that someone had left on the curb, he began to work, hands moving with practiced ease. People watched quietly, some murmuring among themselves. The motorcycle's engine sputtered and coughed, then roared to life under his touch. Gasps and murmurs filled the air. A young boy, clutching a toy car, watched wide-eyed. "Wow, you really are amazing," he said softly. He looked at the boy and smiled gently. "Every machine tells a story," he said. "You just have to listen." The crowd had grown larger, and the journalist was scribbling furiously in her notebook, clearly captivated by what she was witnessing. Her cameraman leaned close, whispering, "This is gold. People will talk about this all over the city." It wasn't long before social media picked up the story again. Videos of him fixing cars, motorcycles, even small machines like bicycles and toys began circulating widely. The views skyrocketed. People were shocked and inspired in equal measure. Comments ranged from disbelief to admiration. Many admitted they had laughed or ignored him before and now felt ashamed. Others shared their own stories of skill or resilience, inspired by the man on the street. The attention brought people from further away. A retired engineer came, studying him as he worked on an old pickup. "I haven't seen hands move like that in years," the engineer said softly. You could teach a masterclass." He shook his head modestly. "I don't need to teach anyone right now. I just do what I can." Still, his story was spreading, reaching people who could recognize the significance of his past. A man in a tailored suit approached hesitantly, introducing himself as someone who had worked in the auto industry decades ago. I think I know you," he said. "You were part of the team that designed the Apex series, weren't you?" He nodded quietly. "Yes, that was some time ago." The man's eyes widened. It's incredible to see you here, doing this. You've changed the way cars are built. People owe a lot to your work." He shrugged softly, almost embarrassed by the praise. "I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because I loved it. I still love it." By mid-morning, news vans started arriving. Local television stations sent reporters, eager to capture the story of the man who had been ignored and laughed at only to reveal himself as a legend. Cameras rolled as he worked on a small delivery van that had stalled again, the crowd now forming a semicircle around him. Every move he made was precise, calm, and efficient. When the engine hummed to life, the applause was spontaneous, heartfelt. The journalist from earlier returned with a microphone. "Sir," she asked gently, "can you tell us how you ended up here, after achieving so much?" He took a deep breath, letting the sounds of the street fade around him. Life has a way of changing direction. I had success, I had recognition, but it didn't last forever. Circumstances changed, people changed, and suddenly I found myself in a place I never expected. But that doesn't mean I stopped being who I am or doing what I can." The reporter nodded. "And now people see you for your skill, for your story. How does that feel?" He paused, considering. "It's unexpected. I don't seek fame. But it's nice when people finally look and see instead of assuming. Everyone deserves to be seen for what they can give, not just what they wear or where they sleep." The story quickly went national. News outlets shared videos, interviews, and photos. Headlines read, "Homeless veteran turns legend, fixes cars, inspires a city, from streets to spotlight. The man who refused to be forgotten, hidden talent revealed. Homeless auto engineer stuns community." The reaction was overwhelming, both online and offline. People shared the videos, leaving comments of respect, admiration, and encouragement. Former colleagues, old friends, and even some past rivals reached out. Messages flooded in emails, social media messages, phone calls. Some expressed regret for losing touch, some sought reconciliation, and others wanted to reconnect professionally. He read each carefully, responding with thoughtfulness, but remaining cautious. Not everyone in his past had his best interests at heart. Meanwhile, the local community rallied around him. People brought food, blankets, and tools. Mechanics from nearby shops offered him work, not as charity, but as recognition of his skill. It wasn't about pity, it was about respect, and that made all the difference. A man in his 60s, clearly a former auto executive, approached with a smile. "You have no idea how much of a story you are," he said. "People like you, they don't appear often. Talent like this, combined with humility, it's rare." He nodded. "I never thought of myself as a story. I just do what I can." The crowd around him had grown to dozens, then hundreds as news spread. People were no longer laughing. They were listening, watching, and learning. Children looked up at him with wide eyes, inspired by the fact that someone could overcome so much and still retain skill, patience, and dignity. A man from a nearby cafe handed him a cup of coffee. "You've made my day," he said. "I didn't believe it at first, but now I see. You're incredible." He accepted it quietly. "Thank you," he said. It was moments like this that mattered most: human connection, recognition of effort, respect without expectation. By evening, a sense of calm had returned to the street, though the energy lingered. The media crews packed up, but the story continued to spread. Online, hashtags began trending. Hashtag hidden legend, hashtag homeless hero, hashtag skill matters. People were sharing videos, articles, and stories of their own small acts of skill and perseverance. The man on the street had become a symbol, a reminder that talent and experience are valuable, no matter the circumstances. He found a quiet corner behind the cafe, pulling his jacket tighter against the night chill. He ate a simple meal someone had brought, reflecting on the day. Recognition had arrived, yes, but it was not fame he sought. What mattered most was that people had begun to see him for who he truly was, not as a homeless man, but as a skilled, capable human being with a history, a story, and something to give. As he watched the city lights flicker in the distance, he realized that life had a strange way of testing people. Could bring you to the lowest places and then, unexpectedly, show you that you still had value, still had skill, and still had a purpose. The world could laugh, ignore, and turn away, but the truth of who you were could not be hidden forever. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the city wash over him. The honking of cars, the distant chatter, the hum of electricity in the streetlights. It was all part of life, part of the rhythm he had come to understand. And in that rhythm he found a sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people, new opportunities to help, to fix, to inspire. He didn't know what the future held, and he didn't need to. He had survived the streets, found recognition in unexpected ways, and reminded people that skill, patience, and quiet strength are things that no one can take away. And slowly, the world began to take notice, not just of the man fixing cars, but of the man himself. The one who had been invisible, ignored, and laughed at. The one who had waited patiently for a chance to be seen. The one who had proven that true value cannot be measured by clothes, by wealth, or by circumstance, but by what you carry inside, by what you can do, and by how you treat the world and those around you. He fell asleep that night behind the cafe, not in comfort, but in hope. Hope that the next day would bring even more chances to show skill, to help someone in need, and to quietly remind the world that heroes are not always on stages or in magazines. They are often in plain sight. The morning air was crisp as he made his way back to the corner he had claimed as his workspace. The city felt alive, humming with movement and energy, but he no longer felt invisible. People stopped to greet him, nod in respect, or simply smile as they passed. The stories, videos, and news articles about him had spread further than he had ever imagined. For the first time in years, he felt recognized not for what he had lost, but for what he could still give. He sat quietly, surveying the street. Already, there were familiar faces in the crowd. Neighbors, friends, and even people who had come from across the city just to see him. A local mechanic, impressed by his skill and humility, had offered him a small space in his garage. It wasn't much, just a corner with some tools, but it was enough. Enough to give him stability, a place to work, and a sense that he belonged somewhere again. The man was hesitant at first. He had spent so long living on the streets, surviving day by day, that the thought of accepting help felt strange. But he also understood that this was not charity. It was recognition of his talent and experience. That made all the difference. He walked to the garage with the mechanic, who was eager to show him the space. Tools lined the walls, neatly organized, and a few old engines waited for attention. It was quiet, clean, and safe. It wasn't home in the traditional sense, but it felt like a new beginning. "Take what you need," the mechanic said kindly. "Use the space. Fix what you want. People are starting to notice your skill, and they'll come to you. This is your place now." He nodded, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "Thank you. I'll make the most of it." That day, he began working on small projects, helping the mechanic repair a few cars and motorcycles. His hands moved with the same precision and care as always. But now, he did it surrounded by people who respected him, who saw him not as a homeless man, but as a master of his craft. It was a strange feeling, one he was still adjusting to. Word spread quickly. Customers came to the garage, eager to meet the man who had once been a legend and had now returned, even in unexpected circumstances. People brought broken cars, bikes, and small machines, trusting that he could fix them. And he did every time with patience, skill, and a quiet pride that was noticeable but not boastful. One afternoon, a young boy and his father arrived, carrying a small car that wouldn't start. The boy looked up at him with wide eyes. "Can you fix it?" he asked. He smiled. "Of course. Let's see what's wrong." The boy watched closely as he opened the hood, his hands moving expertly over the engine. Within moments, the car hummed to life, smooth and steady. The boy's face lit up with amazement. "Wow, you're incredible." He handed the boy the keys. "Remember, every machine has a story. Listen to it and you'll understand it." The boy grinned, hugging his father. "I want to be like him when I grow up." The man chuckled softly. "You can be. Just pay attention and never stop learning." As days turned into weeks, his life began to change in ways he hadn't dared to imagine. The garage became his home, a place where he could work, teach, and be recognized for his talent. People came from all over, some offering opportunities to work on special projects, others simply wanting to learn from him. He was cautious at first, but slowly, he began mentoring young mechanics, sharing not only his technical skills but also the lessons he had learned about patience, humility, and perseverance. He taught them that skill alone was not enough. Respect for the work, for the people around you, and for yourself was equally important. One morning, a young woman arrived at the garage, carrying a broken-down delivery van. She had read about him online and wanted his help. "I've heard of you," she said, her voice nervous but excited. "People say you're incredible. I don't know if my van can be fixed, but I trust you can do it." He nodded, inspecting the van carefully. "We'll see what we can do," he said, his tone calm and confident. As he worked, the woman watched, clearly fascinated. She asked questions, trying to understand not just what he was doing, but why. He answered patiently, explaining the steps, the reasoning, and the care required to make a machine work perfectly. By the time the van was running smoothly again, the woman was amazed. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her eyes wide with admiration. "You don't need to thank me," he said softly. "Just take care of it and remember what you've learned. That's enough." The community continued to embrace him. People who had once ignored or laughed at him now offered friendship, support, and opportunities. A local cafe owner invited him to give occasional demonstrations for customers, showing how engines worked and sharing stories about his past projects. Children and adults alike came to watch, fascinated by the man who had once been invisible and now inspired everyone he met. He never forgot the streets, though. He remembered the nights of cold, hunger, and loneliness. Those memories kept him grounded, humble, and grateful for every small kindness. He often returned to the places where he had once sat with his sign, quietly helping anyone who needed it, offering a word of encouragement, or fixing a broken bike for a child. One afternoon, a man approached, holding an old, rusted car. "I don't know if it's worth fixing," he said, shaking his head. "It's been sitting for years, but I've heard of you, They say you can bring anything back to life. He examined the car, running his hands over the worn metal and rusted engine. Every machine has a story, he said, and every story deserves a chance to continue. Hours later, the car roared to life, smooth and strong. The man looked at him with amazement, shaking his head. I don't know how you do it. You're unbelievable. He smiled softly. It's not magic, just patience, knowledge, and care. By now, his story had reached far beyond the city. National media wanted interviews, and even former colleagues from his early career reached out, eager to reconnect and collaborate. He accepted cautiously, aware that fame could be as dangerous as invisibility, but also knowing that his skill deserved recognition. Through it all, he remained humble. He didn't seek accolades or praise. His joy came from fixing what others thought was impossible, helping people, and teaching those willing to learn. He had found purpose again, and that purpose brought him more satisfaction than any award or title ever could. Months passed. The garage grew, more people came for guidance, and the community rallied around him. He became a mentor, a teacher, a quiet hero who reminded everyone that talent and skill are not determined by wealth, appearance, or circumstance. One evening, as the sun set over the city, he stood outside the garage, looking at the street where he had once sat with his cardboard sign. The memories were vivid. Cold nights, empty stomachs, the laughter of those who didn't understand him. And yet, those memories were no longer painful. They had shaped him, made him resilient, and taught him the value of patience, humility, and quiet strength. A young boy ran past, waving excitedly. Look, it's him, the man who fixes everything. He waved back, smiling. The city had changed too. People now stopped to say hello, to watch him work, to ask questions and learn. Respect had replaced ignorance. Recognition had replaced laughter. And through it all, he had remained the same man, quiet, humble, and focused on his craft. That night, he sat quietly in the garage, the city lights flickering through the windows. He thought about the journey, from a man invisible on the streets to someone who inspired and taught others. It had been a long road, filled with hardship, patience, and quiet determination. But he had arrived not because the world had noticed him, but because he had never stopped doing what he could, even when no one was watching. He closed his eyes and let himself feel gratitude for the small acts of kindness, for the people who had given him a chance, for the skills he had never lost, and for the opportunity to use them again. He knew that life could still be unpredictable, that challenges would arise, but he also knew that he had found a place, a purpose, and a way to give back to the world. And in that quiet moment, he realized something important. It wasn't about the fame, the recognition, or even the successes of the past. It was about using what you have, no matter how small or hidden, to make a difference, to help others, and to remain true to yourself. He had been invisible once, forgotten, overlooked, but now he was seen. He was respected, and more importantly, he had found meaning in every act of repair, every lesson taught, every life touched. As he locked up the garage for the night, he paused and looked down the street, where once he had begged for a meal. Now, he walked past with quiet confidence, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that no matter what, he had proven something far greater than skill. That a person's worth is never determined by circumstance, but by courage, patience, and the quiet strength to keep going, no matter how hard life becomes. And with that thought, he stepped into the night, a man transformed, not by wealth, fame, or circumstance, but by the simple, powerful truth that talent, kindness, and persistence can never be erased, even when the world has turned its back.